Hello everybody, Exabu here again, and today I'd like to talk about something we should have seen coming from a mile away. In my review of Unity of Command 2, I discussed the choice of the Allies as the player faction in the main campaign of the game, and looked into some of the alternatives.
Let's send the Germans off to the beginning of the war, like 1940 and Fall Gelb, the invasion of France. It's the same theatre even, isn't it? Certainly, and a not insignificant amount of new assets to represent the early war armies, orders of battle, and frontline positions.
And lo and behold, this is exactly what we've got with the Blitzkrieg DLC, offering a whopping 25 missions as the Germans and covering a period between the 1st of September 1939 and up to, but not including, the invasion of the Soviet Union. A whole bucket full of new graphics and game assets included, with a slew of new nations to fight against. Yes, you finally get to invade the Swiss. One bit that I found to be very interesting in this DLC is the fact that these 25 missions comprise two interrelated but still separate campaigns. You always start with the 3 missions of the Polish campaign in 1939, and then you're presented with a choice. You can take the historic path with the triumphant German invasions of France, Norway, Belgium, Yugoslavia, or Greece, or you can decide to forget about Norway and go into France much earlier than what had happened in real life, and dive headfirst into the miraculous world of alternate history, which will eventually bring you to the shores of Britain. I've played about half of the missions in the DLC so far, and I'm happy to say that it's at least as good as the base game. Despite the new environments and a German force that is actually very strong this time, there are plenty of really challenging strategic puzzles to be untangled here. But my final conclusions about the DLC will come at the end of this mini-series of videos, during which I'll cover all of the missions of the DLC. And on today's menu we've got everything up to Conference number 2, with the invasion of Poland, Norway, and the first 3 missions of the ahistoric branch, played on Classic, which is my preferred difficulty level in this game. Alright, enough of introductions, let's get to the missions themselves. DANZIG Corridor is the first, the smallest, and in violation of traditions, the easiest mission of the campaign. Your actions on turn 1 will decide the entire battle, as you absolutely have to take Grudziądz because it will open you the approach to Bydgoszcz and Toruń from the east, and if you don't take the town on turn 1, the Poles are likely to reinforce it and prevent you from crossing that little river. In the west, use 3 infantry divisions to cover Schneidermühl. The AI is rather cheeky and will cross the river to block your supply, and direct your mobile troops toward Bydgoszcz and to a lesser extent to Hollow Forest, because Danzig will be covered, as you can take it on turn 1, what with naval support and that little infantry division with artillery step. If you can, you might blow up the bridge south of Bydgoszcz in order to prevent the AI from entrenching the infantry unit that's covering the town. Otherwise, with Danzig and Grudziądz in your hands from turn 1, the enemy will be in complete disarray, and destroying it will not be difficult. In the MLAWA to MODLIN mission, the flanks play the decisive role. On the one hand, MLAWA has to be taken on turn 1, and it can be a little bit of a problem, so make sure you've got one very strong infantry unit next to it by turn 2. There is also a cavalry unit sitting in a marsh there, which I recommend you to destroy as quickly as possible, because it loves breaking through your lines and taking over your supply hub. And speaking of supplies, make sure you capture that little piece of land west of Osterode. Not controlling that railway can cause you trouble later in the mission. On the eastern flank, make sure you cover the river crossing on turn 1 to prevent the Poles from counterattacking, and on subsequent turns bring all of the mobile troops, including your reinforcements, to that river crossing and advance towards Białystok. This will be the main thrust of your attack. As soon as you take over Białystok, advance in all directions to help take Łomża and Warsaw. Siedlce will probably be completely empty and will leave you a nice little present in the form of a supply hub, and the fortresses in Modlin and Brześć which is the famed Brest Fortress, can be easily dealt with using the flying artillery ability, and I urge you not to hoard the cards that provide these strikes, because that's where they're intended to be used. The Polish Plain will be the first actually kind of difficult mission that you will encounter in this DLC. The map is humongous, and some of those objectives look really impossible, like Lublin on turn 4. The abundance of Polish forces doesn't make the task any easier, but there are still a few things that you can do right in this mission and make it very, very possible. The overall approach is not to commit your mobile troops to battle unless you really need to. Łódź and Bazura are the most difficult objectives in this mission, and because of that, the two bridges north of Częstochowa should be your focal point. And if by turn 2 your tanks are already on the other side of the river and approaching Łódź, you're doing things right. Bypass the defenders and use your infantry to destroy some of them and cover the supply lines. In this scenario, it's very possible to take Warsaw unguarded even, if you're fast enough. Also, don't expect too many attacks from the Kalisz area and don't use too many troops to cover it. On to the second point, Kraków and beyond. The same principle applies here as well. Only use your infantry to destroy the defenders of Katowice, and then move your tanks and motorized infantry as quickly as possible towards Krakow, and then along the railway towards Kielce and Radom. These areas are poorly defended, the railway provides enough supply so you can just rush ahead. Once you reach Kielce, you can direct one mobile unit towards Lublin, and turn 4 is very, very possible, it's not defended, and this is where we get to our southern troops and our southern objectives. So my approach is not to do anything about the area south of Krakow and around Tarnów, because you really don't need to take it over, so I direct these southern troops to help in Katowice, but I send 2 mountaineer units and 1 tank towards Prešov, where we'll play a little cheeky sneaky. You can use that road at the bottom of the map to advance towards Przemysl, which will not be defended at all, and then towards Lwów, which will be defended but weakly. The only problem there is the lack of railways and supplies, so I recommend you to build a supply hub nearby and take over the enemy supply hub in Przemysl. After the Polish Plain, the first mission in Norway will seem like child's play. The enemy are green and not numerous, but there are a few things that you should keep in mind. Don't hog your naval support ability, use it on turn 1 on Kristiansand and Fredrikstad, and send the landing craft straight into the towns right after. Paradropping in Fornebu is an obvious choice, and you should do it. The defenders there are very weak and will retreat. The defenders in Stavanger are stronger, so I recommend you to go for the airfield next to the town. From there on, the mission gets rather easy, and just bring in your HQ, bring in your reinforcements. Remember that you need to take Oslo to set up a supply hub, which I do recommend. There is really no chance of you using any troops you land near Stavanger anywhere else, so don't even bother. And finally, taking Vinjesvingen, that little bit in the middle of nowhere, is rather easy. Just order the infantry division that lands in Kristiansand to go north until they reach the mountain. The key to cracking the Trondheim mission is not forgetting that you've got stuff in the north, like I did during my first playthrough of the mission, where taking Namsos as one of the objectives came as a little surprise to me. But seriously, if used right, that little weak paratrooper unit next to Donbass will win you this battle. So what you need to do is to send it over the river on turn 1, and then in subsequent turns, bring it back to either Donbass or the road behind it. This way, you'll cut off the supply of all of enemy troops east and south of the village, making your task very easy. In the south, send your forces towards the immediate objectives, and once you take over Hamar, send 1 infantry unit towards Røros. I found it to be much easier to take from the south. All of the troops in Trondheim should be used to take Namsos, which may be a little tricky, but expect some casualties, and make sure to set up a supply hub there. In fact, use all of the trucks that you've got in the north, because in the south, all of the fighting will take place in valleys with railways, so supply hubs are not really necessary. Alright, now that the holiday in the beautiful Norway is over, time to step into the fantasy land of the ahistoric branch of the campaign. The FEINT to Antwerp mission might seem like an easy one, what with the rather weak Belgian troops and even weaker Dutch troops, but according to the briefing, the whole point of this operation is to elicit a reaction from the French forces, and boy, there will be a reaction. The French will bring a crapload of troops and tanks and everything, so you have to deal with the objectives before the main wave arrives. I found that Liège and especially Leuven are the most difficult objectives of the mission, which is the reason why you should send all your strong mobile troops there and take them first. Use the flying artillery ability on Liège to soften up the defenders and squeeze them out of the city, then break through with your tanks and go along the railway towards Leuven. The Belgians and the French will counterattack and there will be plenty of enemy troops, but this is a way to comfortably take Leuven by turn 4 or 5. Your infantry should cover the area around Liège and advance into the Netherlands, which are not well protected at all, eventually reaching Antwerpen and helping to take it over. The Force Allied commitment objective will just happen on its own during the mission. There will be plenty of stragglers for you to capture. The final BRAUN mission will fall brown on you indeed. This is by far the most difficult mission we will look at today, and well, let's get to why. Well, apart from the obvious Maginot Line and all of the craploads of enemies on the map, you've got those very, very distant objectives like Troyes and Dijon, which will be very tough to take in time or at all. And the main impediment here, aside from the enemies, is the lack of supply, because all three railways that could provide you with that supply around Dijon and Troyes are covered by enemy fortifications. So one, you've got the railway that leads through Metz, which is incredibly well protected. There's another one going through Strasbourg, and the final one is in the south, covered by the Swiss, which we'll get to fight, finally. And unless you take at least one of the defended positions, you will have problems with supply in the west of the map. So the two most important things that you should do on turn 1 is to break through Saarbrücken in the north. Your objective is to take that little hex east of the enemy supply hub. This is the only supply line that feeds the fortified area around Strasbourg, meaning that in a couple of turns, these guys will be completely routed. In the south, take Basel, soften it up with artillery, and send one of the paratrooper divisions to take it over. This is important because once you capture Basel and Mulhouse, you will have control of that railway junction and will be able to supply your troops advancing towards Troyes and Dijon. The rest of the paratroopers should go to Bern and Pont-à-Mousson. Col de Roche is not as urgent, plus you will be able to land a few troops next to Bern, so it's not that critical. Past turn 1, your troops will mainly have to move along the railways from Nancy to Chalon and from Mulhouse towards Troyes and Dijon. If you haven't guessed already, the management of supply hubs is very important this mission, so don't hog your cards, use them up. The next mission is not going to be as difficult. One important little point about Dijon and the southwest of the map in general is that I recommend not losing the guys you land in Bern. It's a very good idea to destroy as many enemies as possible there, because the French will happily reinforce those units and bring them to Dijon, making that objective nearly impossible. Prevent them from doing that. And finally, the last mission before the second conference, and the last mission for today, is PANZERSCHLACHT Paris. And after the horror of Fight Brown, you realize the developers of this game are not horrible people, and Paris is a relatively easy mission if you know what you're doing. The initial positioning of your units is very chaotic and doesn't really suit the task you have at hand, so your focus should be the mobile troops in the center, and you should only reinforce them. Do not reinforce the tanks near Dijon. They will not be as useful to you as the rest of them. The guys in the center will take all of the difficult objectives, and they have to be top-notch. Also, before turn 1, don't forget to repair all the bridges that you can, just to help you a little with the initial advance. The briefing mentions a counterattack in Reims, which will happen, and you should leave some infantry with AT guns, and entrenching them would be a great idea just to destroy some of those enemy tanks. There will be enemy tanks. At the same time, they will not prevent you from advancing towards Paris and then rushing towards Dieppe and Rouen. Those latter ones will not be well protected, and most of the resistance you'll face will be in Paris, and this is where I have another tip for you. Put the precision bombing ability to good use and destroy the bridge northeast of Paris as soon as you can to prevent the British from entering the city. If you can, also destroy the bridges to the west of the city to completely cut off the defenders from supply. Once you have done this, it's only a matter of time to grind through the initial defenders of Paris and then just break through and take over pretty much the entire map. And the fictional fall of Paris is a good place to call it a day. So far, the Blitzkrieg DLC has been excellent, and it's just Unity of Command 2 in early war, and as the Germans. Do I even need to say anything else? Anyway, in the next episode, I'll cover the historic branch of the campaign, and in the meantime, if you have any suggestions, questions, or corrections, please leave them in the comments. Good night.